The heavy click of the boardroom door closing behind me felt like a physical blow. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was suffocating, a vacuum where oxygen used to be. My cheeks burned with a humiliating heat, a stark contrast to the icy chill of the glass table I'd been gripping just moments ago. I could still hear the echo of Minnie's voice, calm, precise, devastating, dismantling my entire career in 3 sentences. I walked back to my desk, my legs numb and hands trembling, waiting for the termination email. I thought it was the end. To understand why it hurt so much, you have to understand the room. The 40th floor of Vance & Sterling wasn't just an office. It was an architecture of control. Everything about it was designed to intimidate. The floor-to-ceiling windows reduced the sprawling city below to a mere circuit board. The air always smelled faintly of ozone and expensive espresso. The silence cost more than most people's mortgages. This was Minnie's kingdom. And Minnie, she wasn't just a boss. She was a force of nature contained within a tailored suit. She moved with a terrifying grace, never rushing, never stumbling. Her authority wasn't loud, it was absolute. She didn't demand attention, she captured it, effortlessly. For 3 years, I had existed in her orbit. I had memorized her rhythms, predicted her needs before she even articulated them. We had a language of silence and raised eyebrows. I thought I was essential. I thought I was safe. But the investor meeting changed the atmosphere in a heartbeat. It was the venture capital group from Tokyo. High stakes, the kind of merger that defines a decade. The conference room was charged, thick with the scent of ambition and fear. I had checked the presentation 3 times. I had verified every figure. But when the projection hit the screen, the valuation model on slide 14 was wrong. A glitch. A save error. It didn't matter. The numbers were off by a factor of 10. The room went dead silent. The lead investor frowned, tapping his pen against the mahogany. In that moment, the air thickened. Minnie didn't panic. She didn't apologize. She turned to me. Her gaze was unflinching, a cold blue weight that pinned me to the spot. In front of 12 of the most powerful people in finance, she didn't just correct the error. She surgically removed my credibility. "It appears," she said, her voice smooth and low, "that my executive assistant has struggled to distinguish between precision and approximation." She didn't yell. She didn't lose her temper. She simply looked at me with a disappointment so profound it felt physical. "If the details escape you, Chloe, perhaps the responsibility should as well." It was a public execution. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The investors looked away, uncomfortable, but Minnie held my gaze. It was a dissection. She stripped away my competence, my hard work, my pride, leaving me exposed and raw. I wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but my throat had closed up. I was fighting tears, the hot, stinging kind that you can't stop, only delay. The shame was a physical weight, heavy in my gut. I wasn't just an employee who made a mistake. I was a failure. The meeting continued, Minnie pivoting back to the investors as if I had ceased to exist. I stood there, invisible yet exposed, burning with the knowledge that I had failed the only person whose opinion actually mattered to me. When the meeting finally adjourned and the suits filed out, Minnie didn't look at me again. She just walked past, the scent of her perfume, sandalwood and steel, lingering in her wake. I was left alone in the wreckage, the silence of the empty room pressing in on me, confirming what I already knew. I had flown too close to the sun, and I had burned. The 40th floor emptied out slowly, the frantic energy of the day draining away until the silence was absolute. I sat at my desk, the blue light of my monitor casting long, ghostly shadows across the polished surface. The HVAC system hummed, a low, steady breath that seemed to mock the frantic rhythm of my own heart. I didn't check my email. I didn't need to. I knew the protocol for termination at Vance & Sterling. Access revoked, ID deactivated. A security guard, waiting by the elevators to ensure I didn't steal corporate secrets on my way out. I decided to spare myself the final indignity of an escort. I reached for the small, framed photo of my sister on the corner of my desk. My hands were still shaking, a fine, persistent tremor that rattled the frame against the glass top. Clink, clink. The sound was deafening in the quiet. I opened my bag, the leather creaking like a protest. I was leaving. I had to leave before I broke down completely. Then I saw it. Lying on top of my closed laptop, stark against the brushed aluminum, a yellow legal pad. My legal pad. But I hadn't left it there. I had left it in the conference room, abandoned on the table, like a casualty of war. I stared at it, the paper seeming to glow in the half-light of the evening. Someone had brought it back. She had brought it back. I recognized the ink immediately, a heavy black fountain pen. The strokes were aggressive, slashed across the page with the violence of a sword fight. Usually, this ink meant death, a red line through a contract, a brutal cut to a schedule. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the paper, terrified of what new cruelty might be written there. The note was brief, just 3 sentences, but they hit me with more force than the public dressing down ever could. Stop trembling. It wasn't incompetence, it was distraction. Come to my office when the floor is clear. I read it again. And a third time. Stop trembling. She had seen. She had seen the way my hands shook under the table, the way my breath hitched when she leaned in to critique the slide. She had been watching my body while she was dismantling my mind. And then, it was distraction. The word hung there, heavy and ambiguous. Distraction? Me? Or her? The capitalization was deliberate. Minnie didn't make grammatical errors. It was an accusation and a confession, wrapped in one sharp loop of ink. The fear that had been gripping my throat began to loosen, replaced by a different kind of constriction. A heat that started low in my stomach and spread outward, flooding my veins. This wasn't a termination notice. This was a summons. The humiliation in the boardroom, it hadn't been about the numbers. The error was just the excuse. The cruelty was the cover. She had lashed out because the tension between us had become too thick to breathe, and she needed to break something to regain control. She broke me, or tried to. I looked around. The floor was empty. The last assistant had left 10 minutes ago. The city lights flickered on outside. I stood up. My legs felt steadier now, grounded by a sudden, terrifying clarity. I wasn't walking to the gallows. I was walking into the fire. I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and turned toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. The paper felt heavy in my hand, a tangible proof that the ground had shifted beneath us, and I was ready to see where it led. The heavy oak door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a room that felt less like an office and more like the cockpit of a spacecraft drifting through the stratosphere. At night, Minnie's office was a different creature entirely. The harsh fluorescent glare of the day was gone, replaced by the amber glow of the city grid sprawling 40 stories below. The room smelled of cold air conditioning, the rich, earthy scent of her dark roast coffee, and the faint, unmistakable tang of expensive leather. It was a masculine scent, sharp and commanding, usually enough to make my spine straighten on instinct. But tonight, the atmosphere was heavy with something else, something thicker, denser, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Minnie wasn't behind her desk. That was the first crack in the foundation. The desk was her fortress, a slab of marble and steel that separated her from the rest of the world, a physical manifestation of the hierarchy that kept me safe and subservient. Tonight, the fortress was unmanned. Minnie stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her back to me, looking out at the glittering veins of traffic choking the city arteries. She'd removed her blazer. It was draped over the back of her chair, leaving her in a silk blouse the color of a bruised plum. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, but there was a tension in her shoulders that spoke of exhaustion rather than strength. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. She didn't turn around. Her voice was low, stripped of the performative projection she used in the boardroom. It sounded rougher, like velvet dragged over concrete. "I read the note," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt, though my heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I took a step into the room, the sound of my heels absorbed by the plush carpet. You said to come when the floor was clear. It's clear. Minnie turned then. The movement was slow, deliberate. In the half-light, her eyes were unreadable and dangerous. She looked at me, really looked at me, with an intensity that made the air in my lungs feel thin. This wasn't the look of a boss assessing an employee. It was the look of a predator assessing a threat, or perhaps a starvation. The meeting, she started, then stopped. She uncrossed her arms and leaned back against the glass, the city lights framing her like a halo of electricity. I was cruel today. Cruelty is inefficient. It's messy. I don't like messes, Chloe. You humiliated me, I said. The words came out before I could check them, fueled by the lingering sting of the afternoon. You didn't just correct a mistake. You dismantled me. You made me look incompetent in front of the people whose respect I've spent 3 years earning. I know. She didn't apologize. Minnie Vance didn't apologize. She simply acknowledged the fact with a terrifying precision. I had to. You had to? I took another step closer, anger momentarily overriding my fear. Because of a typo on slide 14? It wasn't about the slide, she snapped, the control slipping just for a fraction of a second. She pushed off the window and walked toward me, stopping just outside of personal space. The distance between us was charged, humming with a static energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Do you truly not understand? I didn't see the error, Chloe. I didn't check the numbers. I missed it. I stared at her, confusion warring with the adrenaline. You never miss anything. I missed it because I wasn't looking at the screen, she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. I was looking at you. I was watching the way your hair fell across your cheek when you leaned over to pour the water. I was wondering if your skin felt as soft as it looked under these god-awful fluorescent lights. I was distracted. And in this office, distraction is a liability I cannot afford. The room went still. The hum of the HVAC seemed to vanish. The world narrowed down to the 2 feet of space separating us. My breath caught in my throat. The humiliation. It hadn't been punishment for failure. It had been a desperate attempt to reestablish a barrier she felt crumbling. She had tried to push me away because she wanted to pull me closer. You were scared, I whispered. It was a realization, not a question. Minnie let out a breath that was almost a laugh, humorless and sharp. Terrified. She closed the distance. It wasn't a sudden movement, but it felt inevitable, like gravity taking over. She reached out, her hand hovering for a second before landing on my shoulder. Her touch was heavy, grounding, the heat of her palm seeping through the thin fabric of my blouse. It wasn't the cold, dismissive touch of a superior. It was possessive. It was an anchor. I tried to push you away, she murmured, her eyes searching mine, tracing the line of my jaw. I needed distance, but it didn't work. You're still here. You're still everything. The tension in the room didn't break. It shifted. The professional architecture collapsed, the hierarchy dissolving into something far more ancient and volatile. The fear I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a deep, resonant ache. I looked up at her, seeing the woman beneath the title, the vulnerability bleeding through the cracks in her armor. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice barely audible. Minnie's hand slid from my shoulder to the side of my neck, her thumb grazing the sensitive skin behind my ear. Her touch was electric, a live wire connecting us. Then we have a problem, she whispered, leaning in until her breath ghosted against my lips. Because I'm done pretending I don't want to burn this whole building down just to keep you close. We didn't kiss. That would have been too simple. Instead, Minnie pulled back, the loss of her warmth on my neck feeling like a phantom limb. She smoothed her silk blouse, the mask of the CEO sliding back into place, but the fit was different now, looser. We stood in the wreckage of our professional boundaries, breathing the same heavy air. Go home, Chloe, she said, but her voice was a caress, not a command. Before I forget why I shouldn't keep you here all night. The next morning, the 40th floor was exactly as cold and precise as it had always been. The phones rang with the same frantic urgency. The espresso machine hissed its same expensive steam. But for me, the world had tilted on its axis. When I walked into Minnie's office to place the morning briefing on her desk, my heart was doing a traitorous double-time rhythm. She didn't look up immediately. She was reading a contract, her pen hovering over a clause like a hawk waiting to strike. But as I turned to leave, she spoke. "The blue suit," she said, her eyes still fixed on the paper, her voice low and even. "It suits you. It's distracting." The word hung in the air. I flushed, a heat rising that had nothing to do with the thermostat. "I'll try to be less disruptive, Ms. Vance," I replied, the formality tasting like sugar on my tongue. Minnie finally looked up, and the corner of her mouth quirked upward, a microscopic expression that no one else would have caught. "Don't you dare." That week became a study in duality. To the rest of the firm, Minnie Vance was the iron CEO, the woman who could dismantle a merger with a raised eyebrow. But to me, she was the woman who had stood by the window and admitted she was terrified. We developed a secret language, a dialect spoken entirely in glances and micro-expressions. In the boardroom, while a junior VP stammered through a pitch, Minnie would catch my eye across the mahogany expanse. A barely imperceptible tilt of her head, a slight narrowing of her eyes. It was an intimacy more profound than touch. It was the thrill of being the only person in the room who knew the combination to the vault. I wasn't just the assistant anymore. I was the keeper of the keys. I became hyper-aware of the texture of her authority. It wasn't just the power she wielded. It was the physical reality of her presence. The sharp, rhythmic click of her heels on the marble floor became a signal that accelerated my pulse. I could track her movement through the office without looking up. And the scent, that familiar, sharp perfume. Before, it had smelled like fear. Now, it smelled like a promise. It clung to the documents she handed back to me, a sensory ghost that lingered on my fingertips long after she had walked away. Every time our hands brushed during a handoff, a file, a coffee, a pen, the contact was electric. It was a game of brinkmanship, seeing how close we could get to the edge without falling over. The air between us thickened with every interaction, a static charge building up, waiting for the spark that would ignite the whole atmosphere. We were playing with fire, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to put it out. I wanted to burn. It was a Thursday, late, the annual charity gala at the Met. We had spent 4 hours playing the perfect corporate unit. Minnie was in black velvet, a column of darkness that absorbed the light around her. I was in silver, a satellite caught in her gravity. We hadn't spoken a real word to each other all night, just efficient exchanges about donors and seating charts. But every time she placed a hand on the small of my back to guide me through the crowd, I felt branded. The car ride back to the office was silent. We had to retrieve files for the morning. When the elevator doors slid shut on the lobby level, sealing us inside the executive lift, the air pressure seemed to drop. It was just us. The mirrored walls multiplied our reflection. Infinite Minnies, infinite Chloes, trapped in a gold-plated box rising through the spine of the building. Minnie stood in the corner, leaning against the rail. She was watching me in the reflection. I could feel her gaze on the bare skin of my shoulder, heavier than the silk of my dress. I stared at the floor numbers, willing my heart to slow down. 10, 20, 30. The lift was smooth, almost motionless, but my internal gyroscope was spinning. Then, at the 35th floor, the lift shuddered. A tiny, imperceptible hiccup in the machinery, but enough to make us both shift. The hum of the motor changed pitch. The silence that followed was thick, a physical substance filling the gap between us. Minnie didn't move away from the rail. She moved toward me. She moved with that predatory grace, closing the distance until the mirrors showed nothing but her. She stopped. Close. Too close for a boss. Too close for a friend. She was invading my personal space, dismantling the invisible barrier we had carefully reconstructed after that night in her office. I could smell the champagne on her breath, mixed with the warm musk of her skin. I could feel the heat radiating from her. "You were quiet tonight," she said. Her voice was low, a vibration that I felt in my chest rather than heard. "I was doing my job," I managed to whisper. My back hit the cold metal of the elevator wall. There was nowhere to go. "Your job," she repeated. She raised a hand. I stopped breathing. I thought she was going to touch my face. Instead, her fingers grazed the strap of my dress, a touch so light it was almost painful. You were terrifyingly efficient. You smiled at the right donors, you laughed at the right jokes. You were perfect. Her hand drifted lower, skimming the bare skin of my arm, and I hated every second of it. Why? The word was barely a breath. Because you were performing for them, Minnie murmured. She leaned in, her lips inches from my ear. And I wanted you to be looking at me. I tilted my head back, exposing my throat, a silent invitation. Minnie's gaze dropped. She saw the offer. She leaned closer, her nose brushing against my jawline, inhaling sharply. For a heartbeat, I thought she would do it. I thought she would kiss me, right there, under the security camera, suspended 300 feet in the air. I wanted her to. Then the bell chimed. A cheerful, oblivious ding. The doors slid open on the 40th floor. The spell shattered. The rush of cool air from the hallway hit us like a bucket of ice water. Minnie froze. She pulled back, the distance returning in an instant, though her eyes were still blown wide, dark with unspent adrenaline. She straightened her posture, adjusting her velvet cuff with a trembling hand. "Files," she said, her voice rough. "We're here for the files." She walked out first. I stayed in the box for a second, my knees weak, gasping for air as if I had just surfaced from deep water. We had walked right up to the line of destruction and looked over the edge. And the terrifying part wasn't that we almost fell. It was that I was disappointed we hadn't. The electricity of the elevator didn't dissipate. It curdled. The next morning, the Archer deal, the cornerstone of our quarterly strategy, began to hemorrhage. Regulatory hurdles appeared overnight. The board couldn't attack Minnie directly. Her track record was too pristine. So they looked for the chink in the armor. They looked at me. It started with the whispers. Suddenly indispensable. Late nights on the 40th floor. The implication was clear. I wasn't being valued for my competence. I was being valued for my proximity. The imposter syndrome I had battled for years roared back to life. I didn't see the woman Minnie had praised in the elevator. I saw a liability. I saw a scandal waiting to happen, a weakness that could bring down the most powerful woman I knew. I made a choice. It felt like cutting off my own hand, but I did it. I pulled back. I rebuilt the wall between us, brick by painful brick. When Minnie reached for a file, I placed it on the desk instead of handing it to her, ensuring our fingers wouldn't brush. When she caught my eye during a briefing, seeking that shared spark of understanding, I looked down at my notepad. I stopped the late-night strategy sessions. I became efficient, cold, and entirely hollow. I was trying to save her from the rumors, trying to sanitize her reputation by bleaching myself out of the picture. It took Minnie exactly 4 hours to corner me. I was organizing the archive cabinet, burying myself in physical labor to avoid the mental noise, when the light was blocked. I didn't need to turn around to know she was there. The temperature in the room seemed to drop and spike simultaneously. "You're ghosting me," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was stripped of the warmth she'd shown in the elevator, replaced by the cool, analytical tone of the CEO. But beneath it, there was a vibration of something else. Confusion? Hurt? "I'm focusing on my work, Ms. Vance," I replied, keeping my back to her, my hands gripping a folder so hard the cardboard bent. "The board is scrutinizing everything. We need to be impeccable." "Look at me." I turned. Minnie was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze unflinching. But it wasn't the dissecting look from the boardroom humiliation. It was a searchlight, sweeping over my face, looking for the damage. She stepped into the room, kicking the door shut with her heel. The sound was a definitive punctuation mark. "You think you're protecting me," she stated, reading my mind with that terrifying accuracy of hers. "You hear the gossip, the petty little theories about why you're suddenly in the inner circle, and you think distancing yourself is the solution." "I am a liability," I whispered, the confession tasting like ash. "They're using me to get to you. If we're close, it validates everything they're saying." Minnie took a step closer, invading the sterile zone I had tried to establish. "Let them talk. I don't care about the board's gossip. I care about the fact that my right hand, my partner in this chaos, has decided to retreat just when I need her most." She emphasized the word partner with a weight that made my knees weak. We have a site visit in 2 hours, the Archer facility. You're driving with me. And Chloe, if you call me Ms. Vance one more time while we're alone, I will leave you on the side of the highway. The rain started 20 minutes outside the city limits, a torrential downpour that turned the highway into a river of slate. Inside the cabin of Minnie's sedan, the silence was hermetically sealed. The world outside was chaos, but inside, it was just the soft purr of the engine and the rhythmic thwack of the wipers. Minnie drove with the same intensity she applied to board meetings, hands at 10 and 2, knuckles white, eyes scanning the horizon for threats. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching my tablet like a shield. I wasn't reading the Archer files. I was rehearsing a speech I had been writing in my head for 3 days. I waited for a stretch of road where the traffic thinned. The tension in the car was palpable, a physical weight pressing against my chest. I think you should accept my transfer request, I said. My voice sounded small in the quiet luxury of the car, absorbed by the leather and the rain. The London office needs support on the merger. It puts an ocean between us. The rumors will die down. The board will relax. Minnie didn't answer immediately. She didn't even blink. Is that your strategic assessment? She asked, her voice tight, her eyes fixed on the red blur of taillights ahead. It's the only logical move, I insisted, gaining a fragile sort of confidence. I am a distraction here. You said it yourself. I'm a liability. If I go, you get your focus back. You get your armor back. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Minnie didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply engaged the turn signal, cut across 2 lanes of traffic with a terrifying precision, and slammed the car into a gravel turnout on the side of the highway. The car skidded to a halt, the gravel crunching loudly beneath the tires. She killed the engine. The sudden absence of the motor left us with only the sound of the rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof. She turned to me, unbuckling her seatbelt so she could rotate fully in the cramped space. The dashboard lights cast her face in sharp relief. Shadows in the hollows of her cheeks, fire in her eyes. You think I want my armor back? She demanded, her voice rising for the first time in months. You think I want to go back to the way it was before you? I think you need to survive, I shot back, tears pricking my eyes. I saw what happened in that boardroom. I saw you lose control. I caused that. You didn't cause it! Minnie's hand hit the steering wheel, a dull thud. God, Chloe, look at me. I tried to push you away because I was terrified. I realized I didn't care about the profit margin anymore. I cared about you. She let out a shaky breath, her forehead resting against the steering wheel for a moment, before she looked up again, her expression raw. I don't want to survive without you. The confession hung in the air, stripping the oxygen from the car. The rain blurred the world outside into a watercolor of gray and green, isolating us in this bubble of leather and heat. You're not a liability, Minnie continued, her voice softer now, pleading. You are the only person in this entire company who sees the human cost of the numbers we move around. You have an instinct for people that I will never have. If you leave for London, the rumors won't stop. They'll just say I drove you away. And they'll be right. She reached across the center console. It was a vast distance in a luxury car, a chasm of gear shifts and cup holders, but she bridged it. Her hand found mine, her fingers interlacing with mine, her grip tight, desperate. Her palm was hot, her skin soft against my own. Stay, she whispered. Not for the company, for me. I looked down at our joined hands. The professional boundary wasn't just blurred, it was gone. We were 2 women in a storm, holding on to each other to keep from washing away. Okay, I breathed. I'll stay. Minnie squeezed my hand, then brought it to her lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. Good, she murmured against my skin. Now help me figure out how we survive the board. The boardroom was a theater of war, and I knew the script by heart. It was the same glass cage where I had been gutted 3 months prior, the same heavy mahogany table that reflected the distorted faces of the board members. But the air was different today. It was charged with the aftermath of the Archer deal, a victory that felt more like a ceasefire. The board was happy with the numbers, but they were suspicious of the method. They hated that we had gone off script. They hated that Minnie had relied on intuition rather than algorithm. And most of all, They hated me. Thorne, the senior partner, with eyes like a raptor, leaned forward. He tapped a manicured finger on the quarterly report. The recovery is acceptable, he conceded, the word tasting like bile in his mouth. But the initial volatility? That speaks to a lack of rigorous support structure. We are concerned, Minnie, that your office has become porous. Perhaps it is time to bring in a chief of staff, someone with the pedigree to handle the complexity, someone who understands that precision is not a suggestion. The word hit me like a physical blow. Precision. It was the same weapon Minnie had used to dismantle me, now wielded by a man who didn't know the half of what we had sacrificed. My stomach twisted. The old shame flared up, hot and suffocating. I gripped the edge of the table, waiting for the bus to hit. I expected Minnie to agree. I expected her to nod, to accept the help, to sacrifice the pawn to save the queen. That was the architecture of corporate survival. Let me stop you there, Thorne. Minnie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply stopped the rotation of the earth with 5 words. She stood up, the movement fluid and terrifyingly calm. She walked to the head of the table, her silhouette cutting against the bright morning light of the skyline. She didn't look at Thorne. She looked at the center of the table, commanding the room's oxygen. You are operating under a fundamental misconception of how this quarter was salvaged, she began, her tone surgical. You believe the Archer deal was saved by financial restructuring. You think the numbers aligned because of market forces. You are wrong. The deal was dead on Tuesday. The valuation model was broken because the client didn't trust our intent. We didn't win because of pedigree. We won because of insight. She turned then. She turned to me. The room held its breath. I stopped breathing. The addendum that secured the signature? I didn't write it. Chloe did. She identified the cultural friction point that your pedigreed analysts missed for 6 weeks. She understood that the client needed a guarantee of legacy, not just liquidity. That precision of thought, that ability to read the human variable in a sea of data, is the only reason our stock is up 4 points this morning. Minnie walked back to her chair, her heels clicking a rhythm of absolute victory on the marble. She paused behind me, her hand resting briefly, imperceptibly, on the back of my chair. A claim, a shield. So, Thorne, she continued, sitting down and smoothing her blazer, if you are suggesting I replace the only person in this room who actually understands the architecture of this deal, I question your judgment. Chloe isn't support staff. She is the strategist who saved your dividends. I suggest you thank her. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating weight of humiliation. It was the stunned silence of a room that had just seen the hierarchy inverted. Thorne looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He nodded, once, stiffly. Noted, he muttered. I looked at Minnie. She wasn't looking at the board. She was looking at me, her eyes dark and warm and full of a fierce, terrifying pride. In that gaze, the memory of the first meeting dissolved. She hadn't just defended me. She had crowned me. Under the table, hidden from the sharks, her knee pressed against mine. A solid, unshakable weight. It was the only validation I would ever need. The signatures on the Archer deal were barely dry before the atmosphere on the 40th floor shifted. It wasn't just a victory. It was a restructuring of reality. The silence that usually descended after a merger wasn't the hollow, expensive vacuum of before. It was warm. It hummed. We were working late again. Old habits die hard. But the frantic energy of survival had been replaced by the steady, rhythmic pulse of partnership. The detractors were silenced, not by shouting, but by the undeniable weight of our success. Minnie moved through the office differently now. The armor was still there, the tailored suits, the sharp heels, but she wore it more lightly, like a coat she could take off, rather than a second skin she was trapped in. She walked over to the sidebar, the crystal decanter catching the city lights like a prism. Whiskey, she said. It wasn't a question. Neat. She poured 2 glasses, the amber liquid swirling, and carried them over to where I was sitting. She didn't sit behind her desk, that massive slab of marble that used to be a barricade. She sat on the edge of mine. That small breach of protocol, that casual invasion of my workspace, felt more intimate than a kiss. She handed me the glass, her fingers lingering against mine, warm and deliberate. There were no shadows to hide in tonight. The overhead lights were dimmed, but we were visible. We were no longer stealing moments in elevators or cars. We were claiming the space. To precision, she toasted, her voice dropping to that rough velvet register that was reserved just for me. To distraction, I countered, raising my glass, holding her gaze. Minnie smiled, a genuine thing that reached her eyes and softened the sharp angles of her face. She took a sip, watching me over the rim. I think we proved they can be the same thing. She reached out then, her hand cupping my jaw, her thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with a slow, agonizing tenderness. It wasn't a stolen touch. It was a declaration, made in the center of the room. You realize what we've done, she murmured, the heat of her proximity radiating through my suit. We've built something they can't dismantle, because they don't know how the foundation works. I reached into my bag. The paper was soft now, worn from weeks of being folded and unfolded, but the yellow was still bright against the dark leather of my notebook. I placed it on the desk between us. The note. Stop trembling. Minnie looked down at her own handwriting, then back at me. Her expression shifted, the iron CEO mask dissolving completely into something raw. You kept it, she said softly. It's the blueprint, I answered. It's the moment the architecture changed. Before this, I was just furniture. After this, I was real. I was so angry when I wrote that, she admitted, her fingers brushing the paper, tracing the violent slash of the ink. Angry that I couldn't stop looking at you. Angry that my control was slipping. I wanted to scare you off. And now? Now, she said, leaning in until I could smell the oak of the whiskey and the sandalwood of her skin. I'm just grateful I had the sense to write it down instead of firing you. You couldn't fire me, I whispered, leaning into her touch. I know where the bodies are buried. Minnie laughed, a low, throaty sound. No, I couldn't fire you, because then I'd be alone in this glass box again. And I think we both know I'm done with that. 2 years is a lifetime in the corporate ecosystem, but in the private architecture we've built, it feels like a single, sustained exhale. The hierarchy is a ghost story we tell at dinner parties now. I don't walk 2 steps behind her anymore. I walk beside her. As Chief Strategy Officer, I command the boardroom with my own voice, dismantling objections with the same surgical precision Minnie taught me. But the real power isn't in the title or the equity shares. It's in the quiet, absolute certainty that the woman at the head of the table isn't just my CEO. She is my witness. The real truth of us, however, isn't found in the quarterly projections. It's found here, in the slow, golden drift of a Sunday morning. The penthouse is silent, but it's a warm silence, lacking the sterile, pressurized hum of the 40th floor. Minnie is sitting on the velvet sofa, surrounded by the paper wreckage of the Sunday Times. She isn't wearing the armor of Vance and Sterling. No structured blazer, no weaponized heels. She's wearing an oversized cashmere sweater that swallows her hands, her hair loose and unstyled, her reading glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. This is the Minnie the shareholders never see, the soft, unguarded underbelly of the iron beast. I bring her coffee, black, precise, hot enough to burn, and she takes it without looking up, her hand finding my wrist and holding it for a beat longer than necessary. That touch is the texture of our life now. It's not the electric shock of the elevator or the desperate clawing grip in the rain. It's a steady, constant current, a hum of high-voltage power running safely through the wires. It's the way she traces the line of my spine when we're debriefing a difficult client, a silent reminder of ownership in a room full of strangers. It's the heavy, languid heat of a Saturday night where the only negotiation is who turns off the lamp. We have traded the adrenaline of the precipice for the dangerous, addictive luxury of stability. I wander over to the mantel, drawn by gravity to the small silver frame tucked discreetly behind a modern sculpture. The yellow paper inside is fading, the edges curling slightly, but the black ink remains violent and sharp. Stop trembling. It's a relic from a war we both survived. It reminds me that we didn't fall in love because it was easy or convenient. We fell in love because it was necessary. Minnie watches me from the sofa, her eyes dark and knowing over the rim of her cup. She knows what I'm looking at. She knows that the trembling didn't stop because I ran away. It stopped because she held me steady until I learned to stand on my own. She sets the paper down, the rustle loud in the quiet room, and extends a hand. "Come here," she says, the command soft but absolute. I go to her, not because I have to, but because there is nowhere else in the world I would rather be. The heavy oak door clicks shut, sealing us in. But the sound no longer echoes with exclusion. I am on the inside now, breathing the same rarefied air. True worth isn't granted by a title on a glass door. It is recognized by the one who refuses to look away when you falter. If you believe in the power of being truly seen, subscribe for more stories. Minnie tilts her head, a smile touching her lips, and the screen fades to black.